Welcome to This is Thailand. Most of the stories we tell on this channel have a certain shape to them. You probably know it by now. Man arrives, man meets girl, man loses money, man goes home. Bar lights, broken promises, an airport departure. That's the shape. And there's truth in it, or we wouldn't keep telling it. But every so often, a story comes in that doesn't quite fit. Quieter than the others. No villain you can point at cleanly. No single moment where everything blew up. Just a man who came here looking for something he couldn't quite name and had to find out the hard way that Thailand couldn't give it to him. This is Brendan's story. He's 71 years old. He's from Limerick in the west of Ireland. He spent his working life in a warehouse, 40 years on a forklift, which tells you something about the kind of man he is. Steady, unhurried, not given to drama. The sort of man who shows up, does the job, goes home. He lost his wife a few years back after a long illness. And what came after that? The quiet, the emptiness, the particular flatness of a life that had been structured around someone else for 3 decades is what eventually brought him here. This one's going to stay with you. Not because it ends in disaster exactly, but because it ends in something harder to name than that. Here's his story in his own words. Right. So, I'm not sure where to start exactly. I suppose I should start with the warehouse, because that's where everything starts for me, really. That's where most of my adult life happened. Shannon Industrial Estate, just outside Limerick. Cold building, low ceilings, smelled like diesel and cardboard, and whatever was coming off the plastic wrap on the pallets. I started there when I was 29, left when I was 69. 40 years operating a forklift, later a reach truck, later again one of the big counterbalances. The lads used to say I could reverse a loaded pallet into a racking bay with my eyes closed. I probably could, toward the end. You do something enough times it stops being something you do and starts being just what you are. I wasn't unhappy there. I want to be clear about that. Some people tell these stories and they make out their whole life before it was miserable. Like that's what justifies everything that came after. Mine wasn't. I had a good life. Decent job, decent wage. Lived in a 3-bedroom semi on Ballinacurra Road that Máire and I bought in 1991 for a sum of money that seems almost comical now. 2 kids, Sinead, who's in Dublin, and Ciaran, who's in Toronto and rings when he remembers to, which is not as often as he thinks it is, but that's another conversation. Máire, right. I'll try to do this without. I'm not going to go on about it too long because it doesn't help anyone, including me. But you need to understand what the years before Thailand were like, or none of the rest of it makes sense. She was first diagnosed in 2017. Breast cancer. Caught fairly late. She did the treatment, it worked, we thought that was that. 2 years later it came back. Different place, more aggressive. And from that point, 2.5, 3 years, it was hospital runs, waiting rooms, consultants with careful voices. Learning to read the silences in those conversations, the pauses before they answered, which told you more than the words did. I got very good at reading pauses. I learned to cook during that time because she couldn't stand at the stove for long. I wasn't much good at it to begin with. Too much salt, not enough patience. But I got there. I make a reasonable soup now, which is probably the most useful thing that period gave me. She passed in November of 2022. I was there. That's all I'll say about that. Afterward, and this is the thing that nobody quite tells you, or maybe they do tell you, and you can't hear it until it's you. Afterward, there's this silence that moves in. Not the silence of an empty house, though there was that too. Something more internal than that, like a frequency you'd been tuned to for 32 years just went off the air. And you're still there, receiver in hand, wondering what you're supposed to do with yourself. I sold the house in the spring of 2023. Sinead thought I should wait, that I was making big decisions too soon after. She was probably right about that. But I couldn't stay in it. There was a rose bush Máire had planted the year we moved in the front garden. Sprawling thing, wouldn't be told where to go. And every time I came home and saw it, no. So I sold the house. I left the rose bush for the new owners. I hope they appreciate it. After the sale, After the solicitors and the estate agents and the whole tedious machinery of it, I found myself in a one-bedroom flat on the Ennis Road with a bank account containing more money than I'd ever had in one place in my life, €155,000, which sounds like a lot and in some ways is a lot and in other ways felt like evidence of the problem, which was that I had no idea what a man in my position was supposed to do next. Sinead rang every Sunday. Siren rang when he remembered. I had a television and a kettle in a view of a car park. I had my pension coming in, not enormous, but enough for the flat and food and a pint on a Friday if I wanted one. I watched things on the television I couldn't have told you about the following morning. I went for walks. I read the paper. It was fine. That's the word I kept using. Fine. Grand. Not a bother. All the Irish words for something being okay that you say when you don't want anyone worrying about you, which sometimes also means when you don't want to worry yourself. The flat was fine. The arrangement was fine. I was fine. Fine is the most dishonest word in the language, I've decided. It means I am holding on, and I would prefer not to examine too closely what I'm holding on to, or why, or what happens if I let go. Anyway, Desi Moriarty had worked alongside me in the warehouse for about 15 years, then took early retirement at 62, and everyone said, "Isn't that great for him?" and nobody thought much more about it. That's how it works. People leave. You miss them for a week. The roster fills in. I hadn't thought about Desi in years, honestly, and then he started posting photos on Facebook. I'm not a big Facebook man, never have been, but I have an account because Sinead set it up, and occasionally something from one of the cousins comes through, and Desi starts appearing in my feed, which Facebook had decided I might enjoy, because apparently even the algorithm could tell I had nothing else to do on a Tuesday evening. The photos were, I don't know how to explain this without sounding soft. They were warm. Everything in them was warm. The light, the colors, the food on the tables, the temples in the backgrounds. Desi looked 20 years younger, which I put down to the filtering on these things. But still, there was something about them. Thailand, the caption said. Chiang Mai. I had a vague idea of where Thailand was. Southeast Asia, hot, temples. That was roughly the sum of my knowledge. I looked at those photos at midnight more than once. Not because I wanted Desi's life. I didn't particularly want Desi's life, and we'd never been close enough friends for me to have strong feelings either way. It was more, I wanted to understand what it felt like to be somewhere that looked like that, somewhere that warm, somewhere that far from a car park on the Ennis Road. I Googled it eventually, the way you circle something before you admit you're interested in it. Read a few forums, watch some videos on YouTube. Found after a while that Chiang Mai came up repeatedly for older travelers, retired people, people who wanted something quieter than Bangkok. The forums were full of lads going on about Pattaya, which I read enough about to know was not for me. I'm 69, I kept thinking. I'm not going to Pattaya. Chiang Mai looked different. Old temples, night markets, mountain air apparently, cooler than the south. A pace that seemed slower. Like a place that wasn't trying to impress you or take your wallet. Just existed. Quietly. I booked 2 weeks in late September. Economy class, which took 11 hours and left me with a back like a question mark. But anyway, I told Sinead I was taking a holiday and she said where? And I said Thailand. And she said Dad, and I said I'll ring when I land. And she said you'd better. And that was that conversation. I didn't know then that I wouldn't be coming back at the end of those 2 weeks. Of course I didn't. That's not the sort of thing you know in advance. The flight landed at Suvarnabhumi at 6 in the morning, local time. I remember the air hit me when I walked out of the terminal. That wall of heat and humidity that everyone who's been to Thailand talks about and that you still can't quite prepare for. Like walking into a room where someone's been ironing for 3 days. I stood there on the pavement outside arrivals, sweating through my shirt within about 4 minutes, and thought, right. This was a decision I made. I had a connecting flight to Chiang Mai booked for 2 hours later. Domestic terminal, different building. I dragged my bag across, found a seat, drank a coffee that was too sweet and too cold, and came in a plastic cup with a straw, and watched the airport wake up around me. Monks in orange robes moving through the terminal. Airport staff doing that prayer gesture. The why. To a spirit house mounted near the check-in desks, a little wooden structure with garlands of jasmine around it, incense burning in front of it. A 7-Eleven already open and already busy at 6:30 in the morning. I thought, I am very far from Limerick. Chiang Mai. I'll try to describe it properly because it matters to the story, what Chiang Mai is and what it isn't. It's not Bangkok. That was the first thing. Bangkok, from everything I'd read, was enormous and loud and relentless, and I wasn't ready for any of that, or not yet anyway. Chiang Mai is gentler. That's the only word that fits. The old city is surrounded by an old moat, square, and inside it there are temples, wats they call them, that go back centuries, gold and orange and white, with these layered roofs that curve upward at the ends. The streets inside the moat are narrow. There are trees everywhere. In the morning, the monks come out in a procession, and the locals line the pavements to give them food. It's called takbat, giving alms. And it happens before most tourists are awake. Just this quiet ritual of orange robes moving through the early light. The heat was 32 degrees that first day, which for late September apparently counted as cooling off. I didn't find it cooling. I found it remarkable. I walked out of my guest house in the afternoon and just stood in it for a minute. In Limerick in September, you're already thinking about the heating coming on. Here there was this thick golden warmth pressing on everything. I'm not being poetic. I'm just telling you what it was like. It was like being held by the weather. I found the guest house on my second day, by accident more than anything. I'd been staying in a larger place near the night bazaar. Perfectly fine, nothing wrong with it. But I'd gone for a walk through the back streets of the old city and turned down a lane near Wat Chetty Luang, and there it was. Small sign. Courtyard visible through the gate, with a frangipani tree in the middle of it, dropping white flowers on the tiles. 6 rooms, maybe 7. Clean. Quiet. The kind of place that wasn't on many booking sites because it didn't need to be, ran mostly on word of mouth and returning visitors. I went in and asked about a room. The woman at the desk looked up from whatever she was writing and said, in decent English, "1 moment please," and went to find someone. And then Noi came out. I want to be careful about how I describe this because I'm aware of how these stories usually go, and I don't want to give you the wrong impression. This was not, it wasn't like a film. There was no thunderbolt moment, no immediate certainty that my life was about to change. She was a small woman, 44 years old, with a face that was calm in the way that faces get when they've had to manage difficult things and have decided that composure is more useful than drama. She was wearing a plain blue blouse. She showed me the room, small, clean, a window over the courtyard, ceiling fan, a good mattress, and told me the rate was 800 baht a night, about 21 euro, and that included breakfast. I moved in the next morning. The first thing I noticed after I'd unpacked and gone down for breakfast was that she brought me tea without asking. Not unusual in a guest house, you might say, except that she'd watched me at the table the morning before, when I'd been deciding between coffee and tea, and I'd taken the tea and she'd remembered. Small thing, I noticed it. She asked me where I was from. Ireland, I said, expecting the usual response, which is generally a momentary blankness, followed by someone saying, like England. She didn't do that. She said she'd had an Irish couple stay the year before, from Cork. I said they were very funny, that they laughed at everything. I told her that was about right for Cork. She smiled at that. So that was the beginning. It was a slow beginning, is what I mean to say. There was nothing rushed about it. For the first week, I was just a guest. I went out in the mornings, walked the temples, ate at the stalls near the moat, where you could get cow pad, which is just fried rice but done properly with egg and spring onion and a bit of pork, and costs about 60 baht, which is less than 2 euro. Sat at plastic tables on plastic chairs, and ate it while motorbikes wove through the lane around me, and a rooster somewhere nearby expressed ongoing concerns about the day. It was, and I use this word advisedly, lovely. Noi was there in the mornings and sometimes in the evenings. She ran the place largely on her own, and with a woman from the neighborhood who came in to help with the cleaning 3 days a week. I learned that her husband had died, a road accident, she said, 5 years before, and that she had a daughter, Pim, studying business at a university in Bangkok. She mentioned Pim the way you mention someone you're proud of and miss simultaneously, which I understood. I extended my stay at the end of week 1. Just another week, I told myself. The back was still giving me trouble from the flight, and I hadn't really seen the temples properly. And the food was extraordinary, and it rained every afternoon for about an hour and then stopped. And you could sit in the courtyard under the frangipani tree while the rain came down, and it was fine. Better than fine. That word again, but this time I meant it differently. She laughed at something I said. At the end of that first week. I don't even remember what it was. Some dry remark about something. The kind of thing I'd say at home that would get a polite smile if I was lucky. And she laughed. Actually laughed. A quick, genuine laugh. And then looked slightly surprised at herself, as if she hadn't expected to find it funny. I thought about that afterward more than was probably warranted. I extended my stay again at the end of week 2. Another week. Just another week. I hadn't had anyone pay that kind of attention to me since Máire was well. I don't mean romantic attention, not at that point. Just the tea without being asked. Remembering that I'd taken the toast without butter that first morning, and that it was therefore what I preferred. And asking about Ireland in a way that seemed genuinely curious rather than something to say while she waited for me to finish breakfast and vacate the table. I'd become, over the years of caregiving, and then the year of being alone in the flat, quite accustomed to not being attended to. You stop noticing it after a while, and then someone notices you again, just quietly in small ways, and you notice it very much. That's the part one think is important to understand before we get into everything else. It wasn't weakness or foolishness that made me stay. Not exactly. It was something more ordinary than that. I was just a man who had been cold for a long time, and Chiang Mai was warm. At the end of my 3rd week, I stopped pretending I was deciding anything day to day, and just admitted quietly and to myself only that I was staying for a while. I didn't ring Sinéa to tell her this. I sent a message on WhatsApp that said extending the holiday a bit longer. All fine. We'll ring Sunday. She sent back a thumbs up and then a question mark, which was fair enough. I moved out of the guest house at the 6-week mark. I want to be honest about whose idea that was, because I've thought about it since. The way I remember telling the story to myself at the time was that it was practical. You can't stay as a guest in a place where you've started having dinner with the owner. It gets strange. Better to have your own space nearby and keep things separate. That was my reasoning, and there was truth in it. But I think Noi also understood, without saying so directly, that me being a paying guest created an awkwardness that wasn't serving either of us. And she had a way of mentioning things in passing. A friend's apartment on the next street, a good price, quiet landlord, that weren't quite suggestions, but weren't nothing either. She was like that, sideways rather than direct. I came to understand it as a Thai thing, that preference for implication over statement, though I'm not sure I understood it properly even by the end. The apartment was 8,000 baht a month, about €210, 1 room, a small kitchen, a bathroom with a shower head that pointed slightly to the left no matter how you adjusted it. The street outside had a food stall that opened at 6 in the morning and sold joke, rice porridge, with a soft-boiled egg and a handful of spring onion and dried chili on the side, and cost 50 baht. Máire and I ate there most mornings for the first month before I found the noodle place 2 streets over that I liked better. I was comfortable. That's the word. I was comfortable in a way I hadn't been in a long time. And I don't mean the apartment itself. I mean the general arrangement of my days. We fell into a routine. Evening meals mostly. I'd walk over to the guest house after she closed up for the night, and we'd eat together, either at a table in the courtyard or at one of the places along Ratchapakanai Road, where they did a good lab moo, pork salad with toasted rice and herbs, and a heat that crept up on you. We drank Leo more often than not, cold bottles of it in the evening warmth. I paid for dinner. I paid for dinner every time, and it didn't feel like a transaction. It felt like what you do when you're a man having dinner with a woman you care about, and you have the means and she doesn't. That distinction mattered to me. She never asked. I want to be clear about that. She never once asked. I offered everything that was offered. I think about that now. The shape of it. How I'd built a kind of self-image around it. Generous but not foolish. Giving but not taken advantage of. Because I offered before being asked. It meant I stayed ahead of any sense of being pushed. And that felt like protection. The problem, and I can see this clearly now in a way I couldn't then, is that it also meant I removed the mechanism by which I might have noticed something was wrong. If she'd asked me directly and I'd said yes, there'd have been a moment of consideration. A pause. Instead, I jumped ahead of the asking and filled the gap myself every time and called it decency. The water heater went in early November. I heard it from the courtyard. A bang, and then that particular silence of something that stopped working. The guests in the two front rooms were inconvenienced. Noi was dealing with it in the way she dealt with everything, quietly and without drama, talking to a repairman on her phone. I asked what it cost. She told me and then immediately said no. No, she could manage. I gave her 12,000 baht, about €315, before she'd finished the sentence. She took it with a brief protest and no gushing, and I thought, good. No gushing is good. The door I fixed was earlier than that, actually, October. One of the room doors had swollen in the wet season and was catching on the frame, needed the top hinge adjusted. And I noticed it one afternoon and found a screwdriver in the little maintenance cupboard and fixed it in about 10 minutes. Noi came out while I was doing it and said something in Thai that I couldn't understand, and then in English. You don't have to do that. I said I know. She looked at me for a moment and then went back inside. That was the first genuinely useful thing I'd done in about 2 years that wasn't for a GP or a pharmacist. I don't know if that sounds pathetic. Maybe it is. But there was something in the doing of it. The small, practical problem with a small, practical solution that I'd missed more than I'd realized. I'd spent 6 years being needed in ways that gutted me. And here was a door that needed a screwdriver, and I had one. And that was the whole of the problem. I started helping around the place after that. Hey, nothing dramatic. Moving furniture when she rearranged one of the rooms, carrying boxes of supplies she'd had delivered to the gate. She never asked for any of it. I just appeared and made myself useful, which is a thing I've always known how to do. She made me lunch on those days. Khao man gai, usually. Poached chicken on rice with broth, ginger sauce, the cucumber on the side. Or sometimes just fruit she'd sliced and left out on the courtyard table with a glass of iced tea. Simple things, given without ceremony. I rang Sinead that November. She asked how the holiday was going, and I said I'd extended it a bit. She asked until when, and I said I wasn't entirely sure yet. There was a pause, and she said, Dad and I said, I'm absolutely fine, Sinead. I just like it here. Another pause. So she asked if I'd met someone, and I said I'd met several people. It was a guest house. She let it go. She has her mother's instinct for knowing when to push and when to leave a thing alone, and she usually uses the second one on me because she's learned that the first one doesn't work. By December, I'd been there 3 months and had stopped counting days or thinking about flights. I was on a 30-day tourist visa that I renewed by taking a minibus to the Burmese border at Máire. A few hours each way, tedious but manageable. You cross the bridge, get your passport stamped, cross back, done. And the immigration officer at Máire had started recognizing me, which I found faintly amusing. I wasn't the only Farang doing this. There were plenty of us, retired men mostly, with our little day packs and our border run routines, queuing up to reset our 60 days and go back to wherever we were pretending not to be living. I wasn't entirely comfortable with that word. Farang. I heard it a lot and understood what it meant. Foreigner, Westerner, the category of person that comes with certain assumptions attached. I knew about the assumptions. I'd read enough before. I came to know that a foreign man in Thailand, especially an older one, especially one spending time with a Thai woman, carried a set of presumptions around with him whether he wanted them or not. The other expats in Chiang Mai, the ones I occasionally spoke to at the coffee places near Niman Road, had different opinions about how much that mattered. Some of them were bitter about it in a way that seemed like its own kind of problem. Some of them had clearly stopped caring. I tried to just be a person, get on with things. Let the situation be what it was. What it was by December was a relationship. I hadn't named it as that to anyone, including myself, but that's what it was. January brought cooler air to Chiang Mai. Cooler by local standards, which meant about 24 degrees, which meant I finally stopped sweating through my shirt before 9 in the morning. The mornings had a different quality to them. Mist in the hills visible from my apartment window. The temple bells at Wat Suan Dock carrying further in the still air. I'd been there 4 months and had started to understand the rhythm of the place in the way you only do when you stop being a visitor and start just being there. It was around this time that Noi told me about her mother. She mentioned it the way she mentioned most things that troubled her. Not directly, not as a request, but as a fact she was carrying that had become heavy enough to show. We were eating at a place near the Tha Phi Gate, a little spot with 4 tables and a woman out front grilling mu ping, pork skewers, charcoal smoky, about 15 baht each, and Noi was quieter than usual. I asked what was wrong, and she said her mother in Chiang Mai wasn't well. Diabetic complications. She'd been hospitalized 2 days before. Noi had been on the phone with her aunts all morning. I asked what the costs were. She said the hospital in Chiang Mai was not expensive, that she could manage. Then she named a figure, 45,000 baht, roughly 1,180 euro, and said again that she could manage. Awry, I told her not to be silly and gave her the money the following morning. She took it quietly, said thank you once, and that was that. I want to be honest about this too, the same way I was honest about the water heater. I don't think she was lying about the mother. I have no reason to believe the hospitalization wasn't real. What I'm less certain about now is the figure. Whether 45,000 baht was the actual cost, or the cost plus a margin, or something else entirely. I didn't ask for receipts. Didn't occur to me to ask. If Sinead's mother-in-law had been in hospital and Sinead had told me what it cost, I wouldn't have asked to see paperwork. You don't do that. So I didn't do it here either, and I told myself the reason was decency, and maybe it was. I think about that conversation a lot, actually. Not because of the money, and because of the speed of it, how quickly I offered, how little I paused. A man who spent 40 years weighing loads before he moved them, and I didn't pause at all. The trip to meet the family came about 3 weeks later, a Sunday. Noi's mother was recovering, well enough to have visitors, and Noi asked if I'd like to come. I said yes. We took a song thou to the bus station and then a bus north. 2 hours, maybe a bit more, through rice fields and low hills and towns I couldn't read the signs for. Noi slept most of the way with her head against the window. I watched the countryside and felt, not for the first time, that I was very far from anywhere I'd ever expected to be. The house was on the outskirts of Chiang Mai, solid enough, concrete block construction, single story, a covered terrace out front with a spirit house on a pole in the garden, garlands of jasmine around it, a stick of incense burning. The kind of house that working people live in all over northern Thailand, worn at the edges, nothing wasted, a few chickens investigating the yard. There were 2 aunts waiting and a cousin's children who came out to look at me with the frank assessment of small people who haven't yet learned to pretend they're not staring. Noi's mother was smaller than I'd expected, sitting in a chair on the terrace, a blanket across her legs despite the heat. She looked at me for a long moment when we arrived, and then she smiled and said something to Noi in Thai. I asked later what she'd said. Noi told me she'd said he has a kind face. I don't know if that was true or translated for my benefit, but I'll admit I was glad to hear it either way. They fed me a great deal. Tom yum with river prawns, sticky rice, a dish of stir-fried morning glory that I'd come to love, some tam that was significantly hotter than I was prepared for, and that I ate anyway while trying not to show my face going red, which I don't think I managed. The aunts watched me eat with an interest that was either approving or appraising, possibly both. I tried the few Thai words I'd learned. Noi helped translate when things got complicated. There was a lot of laughter, though I wasn't always certain what the joke was. I didn't mind. I ate and smiled and helped carry plates when they needed carrying and felt, as I said to nobody because there was nobody to say it to, like a person who belonged somewhere. Pim came home from Bangkok the following weekend. Noi had mentioned this a few days before, cautiously. She said Pim wanted to meet me. I wasn't sure how to read that. Pim was 22, studying business at a university in Bangkok, and I understood without being told that her opinion of me mattered to Noi in a way that the aunt's opinion did not. She was nothing like her mother. Where Noi was still and self-contained, Pim was watchful in a more visible way. She looked at you directly, took her time answering questions, gave the impression of someone who had decided to withhold judgment, but hadn't decided for how long. Not unfriendly, just measuring. I respected it, actually. She was her mother's daughter in the ways that mattered, even if the expression was different. We had dinner in the courtyard on the Saturday evening, the three of us. Noi cooked. Pad see you. I'm wide rice noodles with egg and Chinese broccoli, simple and good. Pim asked me polite questions about Ireland. How cold was it? Did I miss it? What was the food like? I told her about soup, which seemed to surprise her. At one point near the end of the meal, she said quite naturally, "Uncle Brendan, can you pass the water?" And then caught herself and looked uncertain, as if she'd said something she hadn't planned to say and wasn't sure if it was welcome. I passed her the water and told her it was absolutely fine. She gave me a small nod and went back to her food. I don't know exactly what opened up in me at that. Something anyway. Something that had been closed for a long time. I'm 71 years old. My children are grown and gone, and a young woman I'd met 3 days ago called me uncle without meaning to, and then looked embarrassed about it, and I found that I don't have a better word for it than moving. It was moving. Even now, even knowing everything I know now, I can't take that moment back or make it mean less than it did. When the bus home on the Sunday evening took us back through the same rice fields in the dark, the lights of small towns blinking past the windows, and I sat next to Noi and thought, this is a life. Not my life. Not exactly. But something shaped like one. By February, I had stopped thinking of myself as a man on holiday. I'd like to say that realization arrived with some clarity, some moment where I assessed the situation and made a considered choice to stay. It wasn't like that. It was more that I noticed one morning, sitting with my tea at the window watching the street below wake up, that I couldn't remember the last time I'd thought about the flat on the Ennis Road, the car park, the particular Tuesday quality of my days there. I'd stopped carrying Ireland around with me. For a man who'd spent 3 years carrying quite a lot around with him, that was something. I wasn't sure what exactly, but something. I was living on a tourist visa, which meant a border run every 60 days. The minibus to Máire, the bridge, the stamp, the drive back. Annoying. The men on those minibuses were a type I recognized after a few trips. Retired mostly, some younger, a lot of them doing what I was doing without naming it as what it was. We didn't talk much. You nodded, you waited in your queue, you got your passport stamped by a board official who barely looked at you, and you got back on the bus. I'd looked into the retirement visa properly by that point. The non-OA, which required you to be over 50 and either have 800,000 baht sitting in a Thai bank account, about 21,000 euro, or demonstrate a pension income of 65,000 baht a month, which I didn't have from my pension alone. It was possible, technically, if I deposited the money. I didn't do it. I told myself it was because I wasn't planning to stay permanently. I think actually I didn't want to take a step that would make this official in a way I'd have to explain to Sinead. The guest house renovation came up in March, month 5 or thereabouts. Noi mentioned it in the context of worrying about the coming low season. June through August, fewer tourists, tighter money. She said online travel was changing, that the booking platforms were pushing places with professional photos, and she didn't have professional photos, just whatever guests had posted on Google. 2 of the rooms needed some work. One had a damp patch on the ceiling that wasn't serious but looked bad in photos. The other needed new bathroom fittings. She mentioned a booking system that other guest houses in the area were using. She said it once, carefully, in the way she said things she was uncertain about raising. I asked what the whole thing would cost to do properly. She thought about it and said maybe 150, maybe 200,000 baht. I said I'd contribute 180,000, about 4,720 euro, and she should get it done. Now. I want to explain what I was thinking, because I was thinking, even if the conclusion was wrong. I understood. I genuinely understood that I had no legal claim to that guest house. Foreigners can't own property in Thailand. And everyone knows this, and I hadn't gone in naive. The guest house was noise. What I was giving her was not an investment. It was a contribution to something that mattered to a person who mattered to me. And if that sounds like rationalization, I'd say it's the same rationalization any man makes when he pays for his partner's car repair or helps cover her rent while she gets back on her feet. The difference is scale. The difference is that I was in another country and the woman was someone I'd known for 5 months. But it didn't feel that way to me then. It felt, if I'm being honest, like the most natural thing I'd done since I arrived. I rang Sini out a few days after. She asked how things were going, and I said, fine, lovely. Told her about some temples I'd visited. She asked if I was staying much longer, and I said I thought so, yes, wow, for the time being. She asked carefully if there was anything she should know. I said I was helping a friend with a small business renovation. There was a pause, and she said, that's nice of you, and I said it's no trouble, and we talked about something else. She knew. She's known for years how I handle things I don't want to discuss. She gets it from me. The renovation happened over about 8 weeks. I watched it with the same attention I'd given to any project I'd managed in the warehouse, which is to say closely. And I'll tell you what I saw. The exterior got a fresh coat of paint, which looked well. 2 rooms got new curtains. An iPad appeared at the front desk with a booking system loaded onto it. One of the rooms got its ceiling repaired. The bathroom fittings in the other room. Still original when I last checked in month 10. I didn't press it. I noticed and I didn't press it. I told myself there might have been costs I wasn't seeing. Materials, labor, things that didn't show on the surface. And that was probably partly true. I'd managed enough projects to know that money disappears in ways that aren't always visible. I gave her the benefit of that knowledge when she hadn't asked me to. I think about that iPad sometimes. 180,000 baht, and the most visible result was an iPad. The marriage conversation happened over dinner in June. Noi's restaurant of choice that evening was a Izan place she liked near Pratu Chiang Mai, the kind with plastic chairs and a menu on the wall, and a fish tank by the door, and food that arrived fast and tasted of proper work. We were eating tom sap, that clear, very sour northern soup with pork ribs, and she was quieter than usual. And then she said something about how some of the other guest house owners she knew had Farang husbands, and how it made the visa situation simpler, and how she sometimes thought it might be. And then she stopped and looked at her bowl. One asked her what she was saying. She said she wasn't saying anything. She was just thinking. I told her she could say what she was thinking. She said she thought we were good together. She said she was not getting younger, and neither was I, and she thought maybe we understood each other in a way that was not easy to find. She said she wasn't trying to push, but that if I had thought about it, if it was something I wanted, she would not be against it. I had thought about it, more than I'd admitted to myself, not with any clear plan attached, more as a vague idea I turned over occasionally. The practicality of it, the normalcy of it. Having a reason to be somewhere, a reason that was more than a tourist visa and a lonely flat waiting in Limerick. We talked about sin sod. She brought it up apologetically, explained it as a tradition, said she knew some foreign men found it strange. The figure her family would expect was 300,000 baht, about 7,870 euro. She said she knew it was a lot and that she wasn't demanding, just explaining what was customary. She seemed genuinely embarrassed to be naming figures, which I liked. It seemed honest. I went to the bank a week later and withdrew the money, in cash. 300,000 baht in an envelope, which I put in the drawer of my bedside table. I didn't wire it. I told myself I was waiting until the time felt right. But I held the envelope for a moment before I put it in the drawer, and there was something, a faint resistance I couldn't name and didn't try to. The way a palate sometimes feels wrong before you've identified why, before you found the shifted weight. Just a sense, an old habit of attention asserting itself briefly before I chose to set it aside. I set it aside. The notebook was small, a blue Sylvine notepad, the same kind I'd always kept. You can buy them in Eason's in Limerick for about €2, and I'd packed 3 in my bag before I left because old habits. I used them for shopping lists, for things I needed to remember, for the small measurements and figures that accumulate in any practical life. The one I reached for that Tuesday afternoon in November was about half full. Noi was at the Warrarot market. She went most Tuesday mornings, came back around 2 with bags of produce, and sometimes a container of something she'd bought from a stall for our dinner. I had my tea. The fan was going. A motorbike outside revved past and faded. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular when I picked up the pen. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened next, because I don't want to make it sound more dramatic than it was. There was no single moment, no revelation. It was more like I was doing what I always did with a notebook, which is to say I was taking stock, writing things down, and as I wrote them down, I noticed that some of them didn't match. 40 years of inventory work gives you a specific relationship with inconsistency. In a warehouse, a discrepancy in the count usually means one of 3 things: human error in the original record, something was moved without being logged, or something is missing. You don't panic. You go back through the manifest. You check methodically. You find where the numbers diverged. I wrote down what I knew about Noi's husband. He had died in a road accident. She had told me this in the second week, casually as background. At some later point, I thought month 4 or 5, she had mentioned the year and it was 2018. But I had a clear memory of her saying 2017 to one of the aunts during the Chiang Mai visit in Thai, and Noi translating it differently when I asked. And once early on, she hadn't given a year at all, had changed the subject with the lightness of someone who's practiced at changing subjects. I wrote that down. One item. I wrote down Pim's university fees. In January, 4 months in, Noi had mentioned them in the context of Songkran, the Thai New Year holiday coming up in April, the money she'd need to send to Pim for travel and some expenses. She'd said the fees were 40,000 baht a semester, about €1,050, and that she managed it from the guest house income. In September, 9 months in, the figure had come up again in a different conversation. Something about the next semester, something about costs going up. And the number was 65,000 baht. I'd nodded and not said anything. Fees go up, I thought. Universities change their rates. 2 items. The guest house renovation. I'd given her the money in March. By August, 5 months later, normally I had walked through all 6 rooms on a quiet afternoon and noted what I saw. The exterior paint, the new curtains in rooms 3 and 4, the iPad, the ceiling patch in room 2, the bathroom in room 5, which Noi had specifically mentioned needing new fittings, still had the original fittings, slightly corroded around the base of the taps. I'd noted it and said nothing. I'd told myself, as I've said, that not all costs show on the surface. 3 items. The phone. Noi kept her phone face down when we were together, which I'd noticed months ago and decided was simply her habit. Present, attentive, not checking messages while we ate. A reasonable thing. But there were specific moments when I'd heard it buzz and seen her turn it over to check. Read whatever was there, and then replace it face down with an expression that was carefully neutral. That particular kind of neutral you develop when you're practiced at it. I'd seen it 3 times that I could remember clearly. Could have been more. 4 items. By the time I'd filled 9 entries in the notebook, 6 of them had something that didn't quite sit right. Not dramatically wrong. Each one had a plausible, innocent explanation. But 6 out of 9, in a manifest, is not a rounding error. 6 out of 9 is a pattern. I sat with the notebook for a while. Outside, the street was quiet in the mid-afternoon heat. A dog barked somewhere. The fan moved the warm air around without cooling it. I wasn't angry. That surprised me slightly looking back on it. I'd expected anger if this moment ever came. And what I felt instead was something more like the particular tiredness of a confirmed suspicion. The same feeling as when a load shifts and you realize you'd suspected it all along, but hadn't wanted to stop and check. I didn't say anything when she came back from the market. She made tea. We sat. She told me about a stall that had a new supplier for the morning glory she liked. I listened and I was watching in a way I hadn't allowed myself to watch before. Measuring. Over the next several days, I asked questions. Gentle, sideways questions, the kind that don't announce themselves as questions. What year did you say your husband passed again? And her answer was a year I hadn't heard before. Not 2017, not 2018. I let it go and noted it. I asked about Pim's course, how many semesters she had left. Her answer implied a different start date than the one I'd calculated from what she told me before. I noted that too. The answers weren't consistent, not wildly inconsistent. She was too careful for that. But enough. Just enough. The confrontation, and I hesitate to call it that, because I didn't raise my voice, and neither did she, and there was no scene, happened on a Thursday evening at the kitchen table. She'd made cow pad and we were eating it, and I said quietly that I'd been adding some things up and that some of them weren't adding to the same total. She was very still for a moment, and then she cried. I'm going to be precise about this because it matters. She didn't slowly build to tears. They came immediately and they came hard, and they looked real. I've sat with a lot of people in difficult moments, and I know the difference between performed distress and actual distress. These looked like actual distress. Whether they were for the reason she said or for a different reason, I genuinely cannot tell you. She said she loved me, said it without hesitation, looking directly at me, and I believed it in the moment, and I still partly believe it even now. She said her family depended on her in ways I didn't fully understand, that she had obligations that couldn't always be explained, that she had tried to give me something real while also managing everything she was responsible for. She said she was sorry for the things that hadn't been true. She didn't say which things. I noticed that she didn't say which things. I sat with her for a long time. The food went cold. Outside, the evening sound started up, a tuk-tuk in the distance, and the temple bells from Wat Suan Dock carrying across in the dark, someone's television 2 floors up. I asked her once whether the tears were for me or for the 300,000 baht still in the drawer that I hadn't wired. She didn't answer. She looked at the table and didn't answer, and I understood then that I would not get an answer to that question and that maybe there wasn't a single true answer to give. We didn't shout. There was no drama, no accusations, no names called. It was, like everything between us, quiet. And in some ways, that was the hardest part of it, that even at the end, even at the moment when I understood what had been going on, the texture of it was gentle. It didn't feel like betrayal feels in stories. It felt like grief, like something that had been real and was ending anyway. And for reasons that were true and also terrible and also, somehow, both at once. I stayed that night. I don't entirely know why. I left the notebook on the table between us, opened to the page with the 9 items, and in the morning I made tea, and we didn't speak much, and I walked back to my apartment in the early light. The monks already moving through the streets in their orange robes, the jasmine on the spirit houses at every gate just beginning to open. I moved out the following Tuesday. I chose Tuesday deliberately, or not deliberately exactly, more that when I thought about what day to go, Tuesday came to mind, and I didn't argue with it. It's just a day. No significance attached. That felt right. Noi was at the Warrarat market. I knew she would be. I packed while she was gone. 1 bag. She, the same one I'd arrived with 14 months before, which told you something about how lightly I'd been living. I didn't have much. Some clothes, my notebooks, my passport, the envelope from the bedside drawer. I put the envelope in my jacket pocket. It was going back in the bank. I left a note on the kitchen table. I'd thought about what to write for 2 days, and in the end, it was 4 sentences. I said I was going. I said I was grateful for the time. I said I wished her well, and I meant it. I said nothing about the money or the notebook or the things we hadn't said the night of the cow pad. Some things don't require saying, and some things can't be said properly. And I've never been a man who confused the two. The taxi to the airport took 20 minutes. Chiang Mai in the early morning, the light already warm by 7. Oncoming gold through the trees along the Ping River, catching the gold on the roof of Wat Chedi Luang as we passed. A monk crossing the street ahead of us, the driver waiting without impatience, the way you wait for something that has right of way in a way everyone simply accepts. I watched all of it and didn't let myself feel sentimental. I saved that for later. I knew I'd need it later, and I'd be better equipped to handle it then than in the back of a taxi with a bag on my lap. I booked Bangkok first, then Dublin, then a coach to Limerick. The Bangkok flight was an hour. I had 4 hours in Suvarnabhumi before the overnight to Dublin. In Suvarnabhumi, I ate a bowl of noodles at a stall near the international departures level. Pork broth, clear and savory, a soft-boiled egg split in half. Something green I didn't know the name of after 14 months, which struck me as faintly ridiculous. Cost about 60 baht, about €1.50. I sat on a plastic stool and ate it and thought, quite clearly and without any particular drama, about what the last 14 months had added up to. The accounting is straightforward enough. The water heater, 12,000 baht, €315. The hospital cost for the mother, 45,000 baht, €1,180. The guest house renovation contribution, 180,000 baht, €4,720. The accumulated dinners and small amounts over 14 months, I estimated those at roughly 300,000 baht, give or take, call it €7,800. Though a fair amount of that was just the ordinary cost of living somewhere and eating well. The sin sod still in my pocket was going home with me. Total losses by my reckoning sat at roughly €14,000. A forklift driver's retirement fund, largely intact. €141,000 approximately, still in the account. I am aware that this is not the number that matters most to people on this channel. I know what the channel usually delivers. Men who lost 50,000, 100,000. Men who lost everything. I'm not that story. And I want to be honest with you about why that doesn't entirely comfort me, because I think it's important. What I lost that doesn't appear in any accounting. 14 months. The particular version of myself that existed in those months. Useful, attended to, purposeful in small ways. A woman who made me tea and laughed at my jokes, and whether she was entirely honest with me or not, made me feel, for the first time in 3 years, like a person who was present somewhere rather than just enduring time. I lost that. I also lost the idea I'd carried out of Limerick. The idea that the silence could be fixed by geography, that if you went somewhere warm enough, the thing you were carrying would lighten. It doesn't. I can tell you that for certain. It comes with you on the plane, same as the bag. I was back in Limerick by Thursday. The flat was as I'd left it. The kettle, the television, the view of the car park. A smell of disuse. I opened the window and made tea and stood looking at the car park for a while. I rang Sine out on the Sunday. I told her I was home. She asked how the trip had been, and I said long, good in parts, complicated in others. She said, do you want to come for dinner next week? And I said, yes, I'd like that. She didn't ask for details. She's her mother's daughter. She knows when to wait. Siran rang 3 days later. He'd heard from Sinayad. He said the right things, asked the right questions, and rang off after 20 minutes. That was about what I expected. I don't hold it against him. We are what we are. I'm not bitter about Thailand. I want to be clear about that. It's a good country, a beautiful country, if I'm being honest, and I was honest about beauty when I saw it, even near the end. Chiang Mai in the early morning with the light on the temples is not something you unsee. The food, the warmth, the particular gentleness of the pace. None of that was false. The place was real. Some of what passed between Noi and me was real, and I haven't been able to fully discard that, and I've stopped trying to. But here is what I'll say. If you're watching this, and you're in a flat that's fine, and fine is the most dishonest word in the language, I'd ask you to think carefully about what you're looking for before you book the flight. Not because Thailand will take everything from you. Maybe it won't. Maybe you'll be lucky, or careful, or both. But the thing you're running from comes with you. The silence moves into the new flat too, eventually, once the novelty wears off and the weather stops being remarkable, and the days start having a Tuesday quality again. And the loneliness, which is real and is yours and is not Thailand's fault, finds you there the same as anywhere. I went because I needed to go. I understand that now in a way I didn't then, and I'm not going back. Not because Thailand is bad, but because the man who needed to go there already went. He learned what he needed to learn. The one sitting here now needs to figure out something different. I don't regret going. I just wish I'd been honest with myself about why I went. There's a difference. And it took me 14 months and about 14,000 euro to understand it. That's Brendan's story, and we're grateful to him for telling it, because it's not the easiest kind to tell. There's no villain to point at, no single catastrophic mistake, no moment he can call the turning point and say, there, that's where it went wrong. Just a man in pain who went looking for relief in a place that could only offer it temporarily, and eventually had to come home and sit with what he'd been carrying all along. If you're watching this at midnight from somewhere, that's fine. Brendan isn't telling you not to go. Thailand is extraordinary, and the warmth there is real, and not every story ends in disaster. What he's telling you is to be honest with yourself before anyone else about what you're actually looking for. Because no country, however warm, can give you back what grief has taken. That work happens somewhere else, in a place that doesn't have a booking site or a departure lounge. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. This is Thailand.